They say words don't break bones, but sometimes they break something far deeper. My story begins in those cracks. Small, sharp wounds carved not by strangers, but by someone who should have been my ally. My own brother. From the outside, we looked like family. Blood ties, shared history, a bond no one could question. But beneath the surface, he carried a weapon sharper than any blade: his tongue. He called me names that lingered long after the sound had faded. Failure, he would sneer, sometimes in front of friends, sometimes at the dinner table where silence should have softened edges. He mocked my choices, laughed at my missteps, and carved an identity for me I had never chosen: the useless one, the weak one, the disappointment. Each insult was dressed as a joke, each laugh disguised as harmless banter, but I knew better. Jokes don't leave scars. What made it worse was how easily others believed him. Neighbors would echo his words, repeating his version of me as though it were truth. Relatives would glance at me with pity, offering smiles that felt more like daggers. And in every moment, my brother's laughter rang louder than my silence. But silence does not mean surrender. In my quiet, I was storing something he could never understand: patience. He believed humiliation was the final verdict, that his arrogance would always stand taller than my endurance. But arrogance blinds, and patience sharpens. I cannot deny that his words hurt. They stung like acid poured into old wounds, each remark reminding me that, to him, I was less than nothing. But life has a way of twisting the tale, of turning the cruelest laughter into the prelude of downfall. He never once considered that the day might come when he would need me, when survival itself would hinge on the very failure he had mocked. That day did come. It came with the suddenness of a storm and the weight of irony so heavy it nearly crushed him. My brother, once proud and unshakable, found himself standing on a fragile edge where all his strength, all his pride, meant nothing, and the only hand left to pull him back was mine. Imagine the silence then. The silence of a man who had built his pride on my ruin, now forced to face the truth he had never wanted to admit. The silence of a brother who had shouted failure so often, only to discover that the one he mocked held the power to save him. This story is not just about revenge, though the taste of justice is sweet. It is about revelation, about how life forces us to confront the truths we bury under arrogance. It is about how the weakest link, when underestimated long enough, becomes the strongest chain. And so, let me take you back. Back to where the laughter began, back to the moments that shaped me, and forward to the night everything changed. This is not just my story, it is his reckoning. Humiliation has a peculiar weight to it, one that does not sit on the shoulders but buries itself deep inside the chest. It is not just the sting of an insult in the moment, but the echo that returns again and again, haunting every silence long after the laughter has died. For me, that echo had a voice, my brother's. He did not mock me once or twice in fleeting moments of anger. No, his ridicule was a rhythm, a steady drumbeat that accompanied my life for years. At family dinners, when the table should have been a place of warmth and unity, he turned it into a stage for my humiliation. I remember one evening vividly, the table crowded with relatives, plates clinking, voices buzzing. I had barely spoken when he leaned back in his chair, smirking. "What do you even do all day?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sleep? Dream about being useful?" The laughter that followed was cruel, not because the words were sharp, but because they were joined by chuckles from people who should have known better. I sat quietly, pretending to smile, but inside, the knife twisted deeper. It was never just about the words. It was about the setting. At family gatherings, he wielded his arrogance like a badge of honor. He would boast about his job, his promotions, the respect he supposedly commanded at work. Then, with the same breath, he would point at me as his contrast, the shadow to his light. "Look at him," he would say casually, as though I wasn't sitting right there. "No drive, no ambition. I don't even know how we're related." The words would sting less if they were said in private, but he knew the crowd made them sharper. Public humiliation was his favorite weapon. Even in private, when there was no audience to cheer him on, the cruelty did not soften. In those quiet moments, he would lower his voice, but the tone was the same. "You're a burden," he whispered once, during an argument no one else heard. "You'll never amount to anything." Those words echoed in the silence of my room. That night, louder than any public insult. Because when cruelty is spoken in whispers, it feels less like performance and more like truth. And for a time, I almost believed him. Comparisons became the chains that bound me. Relatives, emboldened by his mockery, would join in. "Look at your brother," they said. "Look at how hard he works, how successful he is. Why can't you be more like him?" Every phrase was a reminder that I was measured not by who I was, but by who I wasn't. I wasn't the achiever. I wasn't the pride of the family. I wasn't even a contender. I was the failure, the disappointment, the cautionary tale whispered to children who needed an example of what not to become. The humiliation seeped into every corner of my life. With friends, too, he could not resist the urge to remind me of my supposed inadequacy. One afternoon, when a few of his colleagues visited, he introduced me with a laugh. "This is my brother," he said. "Don't ask him what he does. He doesn't do anything." They laughed politely, but the sting was mine to carry. I smiled thinly, pretending not to care, though the shame burned in my chest. I learned to anticipate the insults. I knew the exact tilt of his head, the way his lips curled before he spoke, the glint in his eyes when he was about to turn me into the punchline of another cruel joke. And still, I stayed silent. I smiled when he mocked. Me nodded when relatives pitied me, swallowed the bitterness until it became a part of me. That silence was not weakness, though I know it appeared so. It was survival. The weight of ridicule is not just about how others see you. It's about how you begin to see yourself. I carried his words into my solitude, turning them over in my mind until they became questions. Am I truly worthless? Am I the failure he says I am? With every laugh, every jab, the weight pressed heavier. Nights became the hardest, when the silence of my room echoed with all the things I wanted to say but never did. There were times I wanted to fight back. Times when my chest burned with the urge to shout, to tell him that his pride was built on shallow ground. But the words never came. I feared they would sound hollow, that they would only prove him right. So instead, I let the silence swallow my anger, let my patience mask the pain. But here is the truth about humiliation. It teaches you more than pride ever could. In those years of being mocked, I learned the anatomy of arrogance. I saw how easily people confuse cruelty with strength, how they disguise insecurity with laughter. I began to understand that his insults said less about me and more about him. He needed my failure to validate his success. He needed my silence to make his voice sound louder. And yet, knowing that did not erase the pain. The burden of ridicule shaped me, forced me into shadows I never asked for. I walked into rooms already shrinking, already expecting the laughter. My silence became not just strategy, but armor, fragile, but all I had. Still, a part of me held on to the truth I carried quietly, the truth he could not see. While he mocked me for being nothing, I was building something. While he laughed at my supposed failures, I was writing a story that would end very differently. Humiliation may have weighed me down, but it also grounded me. It taught me patience, endurance, and the strength of silence. Every insult was not just a wound, but a reminder. The day would come when the balance would shift. And when it did, the laughter would stop. Not because I silenced it, but because the truth would. For years, my brother believed that his words defined me. He believed that mocking me made him stronger, that my humiliation was his triumph. But he never realized that every moment he laughed at me, he was writing the prelude to his own downfall. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest irony of all. The very brother who called me a failure would one day depend on me to survive. Living in the shadows is not the same as being invisible. Shadows move, breathe, and wait. They conceal, but they do not erase. That was the life I lived for years, cast as the jobless brother, the failure son, the one who sat silently while others measured their worth in promotions, salaries, and hollow applause. To them, I was nothing more than a burden taking up space. But beneath that shadow, I was building something they could not see, something they could never have imagined. Every day I walked through life with two faces. On the surface, I carried the look of defeat, the bowed head, the quiet demeanor, the appearance of a man who had given up. My silence was often mistaken for weakness, my lack of explanations for emptiness. My brother loved that image of me. It fed his ego to believe that while he rose higher, I remained stuck in the mud. He paraded his victories like banners, while I let him believe I had none. But inside, in the privacy of my hidden world, a different story was unfolding. In the stillness of nights when the house was asleep, I worked. The glow of my computer screen became my candle in the darkness. The documents, contracts, and blueprints that others would dismiss as dreams became the foundation of a reality I was quietly constructing. I poured hours into strategy, into decisions, into building something stronger than any fleeting promotion. By day, I looked like a man wasting time. By night, I was the architect of an empire. The contrast was almost poetic. At family dinners, my brother mocked me for doing nothing. He boasted about his long hours, about how tired he was from work, about the recognition he received from colleagues. I listened in silence, nodding politely, as though his words were truth. But in my mind, I knew something he didn't. That the company he bragged about was mine. The promotions he flaunted were blessings granted by the very hand he ridiculed. My silence became a shield, protecting the secret that gave me strength. Living in the shadows demanded patience. Every time I wanted to scream, "You don't know the truth," I swallowed the urge. I let them see what they wanted to see. It was not easy to endure the pitying glances, the whispered gossip about my supposed laziness, the laughter that seemed to follow me into every room. But I understood something vital. Sometimes, light only shines brightest after it has been hidden in the dark. Humiliation on the outside, strength on the inside, this duality became my reality. I walked into gatherings with empty hands while, knowing that behind the scenes, I held the power to change everything. They saw me as the weakest, but I knew I was the pillar beneath their pride. Every insult became another brick in the fortress I was building. Every cruel word became fuel, driving me further into my work, sharpening my vision. There is a strange kind of freedom in being underestimated. When people think you are nothing, they stop watching. They let their guard down. They reveal themselves in ways they never would if they believed you had power. My family showed me their truest selves in those years. My brother's arrogance, my relatives' shallow admiration for titles and wealth, their inability to see value in silence, all of it unfolded before me without disguise. And I absorbed it quietly, knowing that one day the balance would shift. Often imagined what it would feel like when the truth finally surfaced. Would they remember their cruel laughter? Would the smirk vanish from my brother's face? Would the pity in my parents' eyes turn into shame? These questions haunted me, but I never rushed the moment. I understood that timing was everything. Shadows only matter because light exists to contrast them. Until the right moment came, I chose to remain unseen. Yet even in those shadows, hope glimmered. It was not the hope of revenge, but the hope of justice. I didn't long for their destruction. I longed for the day when my worth would no longer be measured by their shallow scales. The day when my silence would speak louder than their laughter. The day when the truth, heavy and undeniable, would finally step out of the darkness with me. Living in the shadows taught me resilience. It taught me the power of patience, the art of restraint, the strength of knowing without needing to show. My brother believed my silence meant surrender, but it was strategy. He believed my bowed head meant defeat, but it was focus. He believed my life was meaningless, but he was blind to the meaning I carried within. As I reflect on those years now, I realize the irony. They thought they had buried me in humiliation, but they had only given me the soil in which to grow. They thought the shadows were my cage, but they were my sanctuary. And when the time came to step into the light, I did not step forward as the failure they mocked, but as the force they unknowingly depended on all along. Because sometimes, the most powerful light is the one that grows unseen in the darkest shadows. My brother's rise did not come with the brilliance of genius or the weight of groundbreaking achievement. No. It came in small, unremarkable increments, like climbing a staircase one shallow step at a time. But to him, each minor promotion was a summit, each nod of approval from his superiors a coronation. And he carried these tiny victories with the pomp of a king, strutting as if the world itself had bowed at his feet. He started at the company like everyone else, a fresh recruit, eager to make his mark. At first, his enthusiasm seemed harmless, even admirable. He worked late, not because the work demanded it, but because he wanted to be seen working late. He volunteered for tasks that others avoided, not for growth, but for attention. His ambition was less about building something meaningful and more about feeding his craving for recognition. And slowly, step by step, he got what he wanted. The first promotion was modest, a move barely worth mentioning, yet my brother treated it like a crowning achievement. He called the family together, announcing it with the gravity of a world leader declaring peace. "They see my potential," he said with a smug smile, lifting his glass of wine. "Not everyone has what it takes to rise so quickly." His eyes, of course, flickered toward me as he spoke, the implication sharp enough to pierce skin. At family dinners, he became unbearable. Each gathering was less about connection and more about his monologues. He spoke of office politics as if they were matters of national importance. He described his colleagues' respect for him in exaggerated tones, claiming that without him, entire projects would have collapsed. My silence, which he mistook for ignorance, became his favorite canvas. He painted himself as the hard worker, the golden child, and me as the useless shadow sitting across the table. "Some people," he would say, swirling his glass dramatically, "just don't understand what it means to be responsible. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real work." His smirk made it clear who the some people were. My parents nodded, sometimes proudly, sometimes with relief, as if his rise redeemed the family's honor. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, my fork tracing lines on the plate, hiding the knowledge that his paycheck, his precious validation, came from my signature. The irony was suffocating. He paraded his success as if it belonged solely to him, blind to the truth that the very ground he walked on had been paved by me. He built his arrogance on a foundation I had quietly laid, yet he believed it was his strength alone that carried him upward. And every time he belittled me for doing nothing, I wondered how he would react if he knew that without me, his promotions would vanish like smoke. As the years passed, his arrogance only grew. Each new promotion, each incremental step upward, inflated his pride further. He began dressing differently, as if a slightly higher title required a new wardrobe. He carried himself with exaggerated confidence, shoulders squared, chin tilted just a fraction too high. Even his walk changed, slower, deliberate, as though the world should step aside for him. But it was not enough for him to enjoy his own success. He needed someone to measure it against, and I was his chosen mirror. He weaponized every achievement, every recognition, every hollow accolade, using it to cast my silence as failure. At family gatherings, he made jokes at my expense, thinly, veiled barbs designed to entertain the relatives while cutting into me. "Don't worry," he would chuckle, patting my shoulder. "One day you'll find something you're good at." The room would laugh, and though some faces showed discomfort, no one defended me. In front of friends, he was bolder. He relished introducing me as the one still figuring things out, a polite euphemism for the failure. Sometimes he would exaggerate, telling stories of my supposed laziness, my so-called lack of ambition, until even strangers believed the narrative he crafted. And I let him. I let him dig his own grave, brick by arrogant brick, never once suspecting that the man he mocked was the architect of his career. The arrogance seeped into every corner of his personality. He dismissed opinions that did not align with his own, belittled colleagues behind their backs, and treated subordinates with disdain. To him, power was not responsibility, but performance. He wanted to be admired, not respected. And because no one in the family questioned his behavior, because they were too enamored with his shallow success, he grew blind to his own flaws. I watched all of this unfold with a mix of pain and bitter amusement. Pain, because his cruelty cut deeper than he ever realized. Amusement, because I knew the truth he could not see, that his empire of arrogance stood on a foundation I controlled. It was like watching an actor on stage, boasting about his role, unaware that the spotlight, the stage, and even the script itself belonged to me. The higher he climbed, the more unbearable he became. He began to treat me not just as a failure, but as a lesson. "Look at your brother," he told our cousins once, gesturing toward me with mock pity. "This is what happens when you don't push yourself. Don't end up like him." His words stung, not because they were true, but because everyone laughed, accepting the story he spun. They saw him as the star, and me as the shadow. They never suspected that the shadow held more light than the star ever could. What he never understood was that arrogance blinds. It made him see only what confirmed his superiority, never what challenged it. He failed to notice the inconsistencies, the small signs that his world was not what it seemed. He never questioned why opportunities flowed so easily to him, why doors seemed to open without resistance. He thought it was his brilliance, his talent, his sheer will. But the truth was simpler, sharper. It was me. In those years, I became his silent audience. I let him perform. I let him mock. I let him bask in the hollow applause of relatives and neighbors, because I knew that one day, when the curtain fell, the spotlight would shift, and in that moment, his arrogance would collapse under the weight of truth. His rise was not his own, it was borrowed. His arrogance was not strength, it was weakness dressed as confidence. His pride was not earned, it was handed to him on a silver platter he never realized I had placed in front of him. And when the day of revelation came, all his years of boasting, mocking, and belittling would turn into a mirror he could not bear to face. For arrogance built on illusions is always destined to fall. While my brother basked in shallow victories, I lived in the quiet shadows, not as a spectator, but as the architect of something greater. I knew early on that the game of appearances was not mine to play. I had no interest in flaunting minor promotions or boasting about titles that held no true weight. Instead, I poured myself into building foundations, silent, unseen, but unshakable. Where he thrived on applause, I thrived on patience. Where he collected compliments, I collected plans. Behind every insult I endured, behind every mocking laugh that echoed across family dinners, I was at work. While they thought I was wasting my days in idleness, I was studying markets, learning the art of negotiation, understanding the subtleties of human behavior that drive power. They saw me as stagnant, but in truth, I was in constant motion, gathering tools, sharpening weapons that were invisible to their eyes. The first steps were small. Nights spent reading financial reports, long hours with books that most would find dry and lifeless, endless research that stretched into the early hours of morning. I traded comfort for clarity, ease for endurance. While my brother celebrated his overtime, I worked in silence, building knowledge brick by brick. Sacrifice became second nature, missed social gatherings, sleepless nights, money invested in ideas rather than fleeting pleasures. I knew I could not rely on the family for support. Their ridicule had burned that bridge long ago. So, I found allies elsewhere. Mentors who saw potential where others saw failure, partners who believed in vision rather than appearances. Meetings that seemed casual to outsiders were, in truth, calculated steps forward. Every handshake was deliberate, every conversation laced with purpose. I spoke little but listened much, weaving together fragments of opportunity into a web of power. The company that would become my empire began as nothing more than a spark. To my family, it was invisible, irrelevant, just another one of my distractions, as they called it. They laughed when I excused myself from gatherings, mocked me for spending hours in front of a laptop, ridiculed my hobby that consumed so much time without any visible return. But in that laughter, I found fuel. Each insult was a reminder that they were watching the surface while I was shaping the depths. I built with patience. I did not rush to prove them wrong, did not parade half-formed successes in front of them. Instead, I let the roots grow deep before the tree revealed itself. I reinvested every gain, resisted the urge to boast, and kept my silence even as small victories stacked behind closed doors. What they saw as failure was discipline. What they mistook for laziness was focus. And what they labeled weakness was, in truth, strength beyond their comprehension. The sacrifices were many, but each was chosen with intent. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to break me, when the sting of their words combined with the weight of my work left me questioning whether the silence was worth it. Yet every time I faltered, I reminded myself of the bigger picture. I was not building for applause. I was not building for validation. I was building for permanence, for the day when the truth would not need explanation because it would be undeniable. My brother never noticed. How could he? His eyes were fixed on his own reflection, too blinded by the glimmer of shallow praise to see the storm quietly forming beside him. He flaunted his small raises while I signed contracts that spanned cities. He wore new suits while I closed deals in modest clothes, knowing the real wealth was not in fabric, but in foundations. He celebrated approval from managers while I secured the loyalty of partners who saw me as an equal, not as an underling. Every empire has its architect, and I chose to be mine in silence. The blueprints existed only in my mind, guarded against the judgment of those who could never understand. I constructed layer upon layer, financial independence, strategic alliances, diversified ventures. To them, I was still the jobless brother, but in truth, I was the one ensuring that their paychecks never bounced, their promotions never vanished, their careers continued to exist. The irony was exquisite, and yet, despite the triumphs I quietly amassed, I never let arrogance touch me. Because arrogance is loud and loudness is fragile. My brother proved that. Instead, I embraced restraint. I knew the time for revelation would come, but it would not be forced. It would arrive naturally, when the weight of truth could no longer be hidden. That patience was not passivity, it was strategy. Every silence was chosen, every deflection deliberate. I let them call me lazy because it revealed their character. I let them laugh because it exposed their cruelty. The longer I endured, the clearer the divide became between who they thought I was and who I truly had become. And when the time came to unveil the truth, the contrast would cut sharper than any sword. There is a certain triumph in knowing the power you hold while the world believes you powerless. It is a quiet victory, one that does not shout but hums beneath the surface, steady and unstoppable. I became the silent architect, not because I lacked a voice, but because silence was the most powerful blueprint of all. And in that silence, I built not only an empire, but also myself. I was no longer the fragile boy who winced at his brother's insults. I was no longer the silent scapegoat of family dinners. I had transformed, forged in the fire of humiliation, tempered by patience, sharpened by sacrifice. My family thought they were defining me with their mockery, but in truth, they were fueling the creation of someone they would one day fail to recognize. For empires are not built in applause. They are built in shadows, with patience as mortar and silence as stone. And when they finally rise into the light, no laughter, no mockery, no insult can ever tear them down. I was the architect. I was the foundation. And though they did not know it yet, I was the hand that shaped their future. The evening had the weight of inevitability. I had felt it building for years. Every insult, every mocking laugh, every moment of humiliation layered like stones upon my chest. And now, it was time for the cracks to spread. It was a family gathering, the kind that always seemed designed to remind me of my place. The dining table gleamed under the warm chandelier light, dishes lined in perfect symmetry, laughter flowing like wine as my brother held court at the center. He loved these stages, the moments when he could puff his chest and let his words pierce me like knives. "Another year gone by," he said with mock grandeur, raising his glass. "And still, some of us are working hard while others—" His eyes slid toward me, his lips curling into that familiar smirk. "Well, let's just say not everyone has the same drive." The room erupted in laughter, sharp and cutting. Cousins chuckled, uncles shook their heads, my father smirked in agreement. My mother looked down at her plate, her silence as loud as their words. I sat quietly, as always. But something in me was shifting. I felt it like a tremor beneath the surface, small but undeniable. For years I had endured. For years I had smiled and swallowed their barbs. But tonight, their laughter was no longer just noise. It was fuel. My brother wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with arrogance. No, maybe we should take up a collection. Help him get started on something. A lemonade stand, perhaps?" More laughter. At least then he'd finally have a job to talk about. The laughter stabbed, but this time it didn't wound. It ignited. My chest tightened, my hands curled into fists under the table. I glanced around the room, at the faces so eager to revel in my shame, at the people who had defined me by a lie. The silence I had wielded as a weapon all these years trembled at the edge of breaking. My father joined in, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "He's right, you know. At your age, I had already built a career, supported a family, earned respect. Yet here you sit, living off scraps. Do you feel no shame?" I raised my eyes to meet his, calm, steady. And for the first time, I didn't look away. "No," I said quietly, my voice even. The room stilled. "The only shame is in how easily you all mistake arrogance for achievement." The laughter faltered. Forks clinked softly against plates. My brother blinked, then burst into forced laughter. Oh, listen to him, finding his voice at last. "What's next? Will you tell us you've been secretly running the world while we've been slaving away?" His words were meant as a joke, but the irony struck me harder than he could imagine. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locked on his. "What if I told you?" I said slowly. that everything you've ever mocked me for was built on a lie you chose to believe? The air shifted. Chairs creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. My mother frowned. My cousins exchanged nervous glances. My brother, unfazed, waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, please, don't start. With riddles. We've all seen what you are. Jobless, aimless, a failure. Have you?" I asked. My voice was calm, but the weight in it silenced even the chuckles that tried to rise. "Or have you only seen what you wanted to see?" The table fell quiet, the kind of silence that arrives when tension coils tight, waiting to snap. My brother's smirk twitched, but he held it firm. "You think you're scaring us with your little speeches? You're nothing. Always have been. Always will be." And that was when I rose to my feet. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed back my chair. The sound of the wooden legs scraping against the floor echoed louder than their laughter ever had. Every eye turned toward me. I looked at my brother, his smugness beginning to falter, his bravado cracking under the weight of something he couldn't yet name. "For years," I said, voice low but steady, "you've laughed at me. You've mocked me. You've built your pride on my silence. But tonight, you'll learn what silence has been hiding." A ripple of unease passed through the room. My mother whispered my name, as if urging me to sit down, to not make a scene. My father's jaw clenched, his pride unwilling to tolerate defiance. My cousins leaned forward, their amusement battling with curiosity. But it was my brother who spoke, his tone sharp, defensive. "And what exactly are you hiding? What grand secret could possibly erase years of doing nothing?" I let the silence stretch. The weight of it pressed down on them, thicker than the air itself. My hands rested lightly on the table, steady as stone. "You'll see," I said softly. "Soon enough, you'll see." The chandelier light flickered, casting shadows across their uneasy faces. The once mockful room was now filled with whispers and uncertainty. The laughter that had so easily flowed minutes before had withered into silence, replaced by something none of them had ever associated with me before: power. I sat back down, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with my brother. The moment had not yet arrived, but the storm had been called. They didn't know it yet, but the world they thought they ruled was about to collapse under the weight of truth. And as the silence deepened, as unease settled like smoke in the air, I smiled. Not the smile of someone broken, but of someone finally ready. The breaking point had come. The silence in the dining room was suffocating, stretched tight like the string of a bow pulled to its breaking point. My brother, still wearing that thin mask of arrogance, tapped his glass to break the tension. But the sound rang hollow, brittle, like glass about to shatter. He had no idea how close he was to losing everything. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze sweeping across the faces gathered around the table. Each one told a story. My father's impatient frown, my mother's nervous, fingers twisting her napkin, my cousin's darting eyes betraying curiosity and unease. And then there was my brother, smug, smirking, blind to the storm he had summoned. I let the silence linger a few moments longer, savoring it, feeding on their discomfort. Then, in a voice as calm as a blade drawn in slow motion, I said, "You've spent years calling me a failure, years laughing at me. But here's the truth you've never even thought to consider. I own everything you work for. Every paycheck you brag about, every promotion you flaunt, every ounce of pride you carry, it all came from me." The words landed like thunder. For a split second, the room was frozen in disbelief. Then, like ripples from a stone cast into still water, reactions began to spread. My cousin's fork clattered to his plate. My aunt gasped audibly. My father's frown deepened into a scowl, as if his pride refused to even process the claim. But my brother laughed, a sharp, mocking laugh that rang false. "Oh, come on," he sneered. "Is this your big moment? Spouting fantasies to make yourself feel better? You can't even pay your own bills, and now you want us to believe you own the company I've bled for?" I smiled, not with amusement, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had already won. "Not want you to believe," I said evenly. "You will believe." At that moment, the dining room doors opened. In stepped a man in a tailored suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase. My lawyer. His presence alone shifted the air in the room, an unspoken signal that this was no joke, no theatrical performance. He walked with purpose, setting the briefcase down on the table. The metallic click of the lock's opening echoed louder than any laughter ever had. One by one, he spread out documents, contracts, ownership papers, stock certificates. Each page bore the same name, stamped with authority, sealed with signatures. Mine. I gestured toward the documents without looking away from my brother. Every signature, every stamp, every record is authentic. I've been the owner of this company for years. The same company you and everyone else here have been so proud to work for. The so-called jobless fool has been signing your paychecks all along. A heavy silence fell, the kind that steals breath. My brother's smirk faltered, his laughter cutting short. His eyes darted across the pages, searching desperately for some flaw, some crack to deny the truth. His lips moved, but no words came out. My father leaned forward, his voice a low growl. This is nonsense, a trick." The lawyer, calm and professional, tapped the top document. "There is no trick. These are legal records. If you doubt it, you may verify them with the company registry. The sole majority owner is your son." My father's face flushed, the denial colliding with a truth too heavy to dismiss. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes wide, caught between pride and shame. My cousins sat stunned, their earlier mockery shriveled into silence, but it was my brother's reaction I had waited for. His confidence cracked like glass under a hammer. He reached for the documents, flipping through them with trembling hands, his arrogance unraveling with each line his eyes scanned. "No, this can't. This doesn't." His voice broke. "You? You own the company?" I leaned forward, my gaze steady, my words sharp as steel. "Yes. Every promotion you bragged about I approved. Every project you claimed as a victory, I allowed. Every paycheck you waved in my face was money I gave you. And still, you mocked me." The color drained from his face. He looked around the room, desperate for support, but found none. The cousins who once laughed with him now sat speechless. The uncles who nodded at his jokes now shifted uncomfortably. Even my father, so quick to defend him, was silent, his pride wounded by the revelation that he had spent years belittling. The wrong son. I sat back, letting the weight of truth do its work. The balance of power had shifted so completely it was almost visible in the air, like gravity itself had realigned. No longer was I the butt of their jokes, the family's shame. Now I was something far greater, the architect of their survival, the silent hand behind their livelihoods. My brother's hands shook as he slammed the papers back on the table. "Why didn't you say anything? Why stay silent all this time?" I allowed myself a small, measured smile. "Because patience is the sweetest weapon. You thought silence meant weakness, but it was strategy, and now you see why." He stared at me, his arrogance replaced by fear, a fear he could not mask, not even behind bluster. The mighty brother, the one who had built his identity on my humiliation, was stripped bare, exposed as nothing more than an employee of the man he had called a failure. The dining room, once filled with laughter, now held only silence and shame. The air itself seemed to bow to the reversal. My brother, the proud star of every family gathering, now sat diminished, his head bowed under the weight of truth. I looked around the table, meeting each gaze. You wanted a failure to mock, but what you mocked was your own ignorance. You thought I was nothing without a job. Yet all along I was the one signing your paychecks. The words struck like a hammer blow. No one laughed. No one dared. The revelation was complete. The tables had turned. And for the first time, they finally saw me, not as the fool they had painted, but as the master they had underestimated. The revelation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Once spoken, it could never be taken back. And though my family tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, the truth gnawed at them, eating away at their pride, their confidence, their carefully crafted illusions. My brother was the first to crumble. At work, he could no longer strut down the hallways with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the world. His colleagues noticed the shift immediately. The same co-workers he used to boast to now whispered behind his back, their eyes flicking with pity or, worse, amusement. He had built his identity on being the achiever, the success story, the golden child. But now everyone knew the truth. The promotions he bragged about, the raises he flaunted, all of it had been signed off by me. The ground beneath him had been ripped away, and in its place was humiliation so raw it clung to him like a second skin. I heard from whispers that his performance faltered. Meetings he once dominated ended with him stumbling over his words. His jokes, once greeted with forced laughter, now fell flat. He avoided eye contact with anyone who might remember the truth, but avoidance was useless. The shadow of his arrogance followed him, dragging his reputation down with it. My other siblings fared no better, the ones who had chimed in at family dinners laughing at his jokes about me, suddenly found themselves exposed. At gatherings, they no longer dared to compare salaries or brag about their lives. Their words, once sharp and mocking, now caught in their throats, strangled by the fear of reminding me of their cruelty. They stumbled socially, their confidence eroded by shame. Friends noticed the hesitation in their voices, the nervous glances, the cracks in their self-image. My parents suffered most of all. My father, who had once measured me by the yardstick of visible success, could hardly look me in the eye. The scowl that used to rest permanently on his face whenever I spoke was replaced by silence, thick, heavy silence that admitted more regret than any apology ever could. My mother, though softer, carried her own torment. She twisted her hands whenever I entered the room, as if wringing invisible guilt from her palms. Their house, once loud with laughter at my expense, now echoed with unease. They could not bear to mock me anymore, not because they had learned respect, but because their shame forbade them. Relatives, too, who had once treated me like a living cautionary tale, fell silent in my presence. They used to exchange knowing glances whenever my brother boasted, and I sat quietly. Now, when I entered a room, those same eyes fell to the floor. Conversations shifted awkwardly, and the laughter died quickly. The ones who once fed off my humiliation now starved in the silence of their own regret. Family dinners became the cruelest irony of all. The same table that once rang with jokes at my expense was now a stage for discomfort. My brother sat stiffly, his fork pushing food he never ate. My cousins whispered only to fall silent when I glanced their way. Even my father, once the ringleader of derision, chewed in quiet misery. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with unspoken truths. No one dared mock me anymore, not because they respected me, but because they feared me. And I made sure they understood the new order. I did not lash out or raise my voice. I did not seek revenge in cruel words or sharp rebukes. My power was not in humiliating them as they had humiliated me. It was in the calm authority with which I now carried myself. I set boundaries. When my brother tried to speak to me as he once did, dismissive and sharp, I cut him off with a single look. When my cousins sought favors, I reminded them curtly that respect was no longer optional. When my parents attempted to soften the past with excuses, I refused to indulge them. Respect. I told them one evening, my voice cold and unyielding, is not something you give only to those you believe are powerful. It is the minimum you owe every human being. You failed that test with me, and you will not fail it again. The word struck harder than any insult I could have hurled. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's eyes welled with tears, and my brother bowed his head in silence. From that day forward, the dynamic was irrevocably changed. No one dared to mock me, no one dared to belittle me. My silence was no longer seen as weakness, it was a warning. My words were no longer dismissed, they carried weight heavier than they had ever imagined. The downfall was not explosive, it was slow, suffocating, like walls closing in. My brother shrank from the man he once pretended to be. My siblings, once loud and boastful, lost their voices. My parents drowned in regret they could not voice aloud. And my relatives, once quick to laugh at me, became shadows at family gatherings. Justice had not come in fire or fury. It had come in silence, in shame, in the slow crumble of arrogance under the weight of truth. And through it all, I stood firm, no longer their target, no longer their victim. I was something else entirely now. The one who held the power, the one who set the terms, the one they could no longer afford to underestimate. Their downfall was their own doing, built brick by brick from years of cruelty. And now they lived in the ruins of their arrogance, while I walked free. When the dust of revelation settled, I found myself standing in a strange kind of silence, not the silence of humiliation I had once endured, but the silence of power reclaimed. It was quieter than triumph, calmer than vengeance, and yet deeper than either. For the first time in years, I had the space to breathe freely, to reflect without the echo of my family's laughter gnawing at me. Humiliation, I realized, had been my first teacher. It was not a gentle one. It cut deep, bruised the spirit, and left scars invisible to the eye. Each time I was mocked, each time I was belittled, it was as though a stone was added to the burden I carried. But those stones did not crush me. Instead, they built the foundation of my strength. Humiliation taught me the art of silence, the discipline of endurance, and the wisdom to wait until the right moment. It showed me the true nature of those around me, stripping away masks to reveal arrogance, cruelty, and insecurity hiding beneath. Then came patience, the second and perhaps greatest teacher. Patience demanded sacrifice. It asked me to sit in rooms where I was treated like a shadow, to endure dinners where every laugh was at my expense, to swallow the bitterness of being misunderstood. But patience also rewarded me. It gave me the strength to build quietly, the clarity to plan, the restraint to resist striking back too soon. Through patience, I discovered that the most powerful revelations are not shouted in anger, but unveiled in perfect silence. Patience gave me timing, and timing gave me victory. Silence, too, was a weapon I learned to wield with precision. In the beginning, it looked like weakness. My brother thought it was submission, my parents thought it was laziness, my relatives thought it was proof of failure. But in truth, silence was my shield and my sword. Silence kept my secrets safe. Silence let them reveal who they truly were, without disguise. And silence gave my eventual truth the gravity of thunder after years of calm skies. I came to understand that silence is never empty. It is full of potential, of restraint, of unseen strength waiting for its hour. Through all this, I learned profound lessons about power itself. My family believed that power was visible: titles, promotions, salaries, the applause of others. They believed it lived in comparison, in showing off, in standing taller only by making someone else look small. But that was an illusion. Real power does not parade itself. Real power is quiet, rooted, steady. It is the ability to change the room without raising your voice, to dismantle arrogance without striking a blow, to hold the truth so firmly that others cannot help but bend to it. Another lesson was about respect. True respect, I came to understand, is not tied to wealth, position, or fear. It is not something people should suddenly offer when they discover you are powerful. That is not respect. It is submission, born of shame, born of guilt, born of necessity. Such respect is hollow, fragile, and worthless. Real respect, on the other hand, is grounded in character. It comes from recognizing the dignity of another human being, regardless of status. It flows from kindness, empathy, and loyalty. My family failed that test. When they thought me weak, they mocked me. When they learned I was powerful, they bowed. But their bow was meaningless, because respect that only exists under pressure is not respect at all. What this journey taught me most clearly was the truth about human character. People reveal who they are not when they face the powerful, but when they face the powerless. How they treat someone they believe to be beneath them is the clearest mirror of their soul. My brother, so arrogant in his climb, failed that test. My parents, blinded by comparisons, failed that test. My relatives, eager to join the laughter, failed that test. And yet, their failure was my education. Through them, I learned to see arrogance for what it is, insecurity in disguise. I learned to see cruelty for what it is, weakness trying to look strong. Looking back, I understand now that my silence, my patience, my endurance, they were never signs of defeat. They were the tools that shaped my transformation. What once looked like weakness was, in truth, the quiet gathering of strength. What once looked like failure was, in fact, preparation for the moment when truth would speak louder than any insult. If there is one universal message I carry from this journey, it is this: never let others define your worth. They will try, always. They will measure you by their own narrow scales, judge you by their own insecurities, mock what they cannot understand. But their laughter is not truth. Their scorn is not destiny. If you carry your truth quietly, if you endure without surrendering, if you wait with patience, there will come a moment when reality itself will expose them. And when that moment arrives, the silence you once carried will roar louder than all their cruelty. I also learned the importance of boundaries. Forgiveness may come, but tolerance of cruelty must not. The lines I drew after my revelation were not acts of revenge, they were acts of survival. No more, I told them, and in those words was the essence of everything I had learned. To allow disrespect is to betray oneself. To accept false respect is to live a lie. Only by demanding dignity can one truly honor the lessons learned in suffering. As I reflect, I do not see myself as the victim they once painted me to be, nor as the vengeful master they feared I had become. I see myself as something simpler, yet greater, a man who endured, who learned, who grew. I am proof that silence can be strength, that patience can be strategy, and that humiliation can become the soil from which resilience blooms. My family may never fully understand the depth of what they taught me through their cruelty. Perhaps that is the final irony. They believed they were breaking me, when in truth, they were forging me. They thought they were defining me, when in truth, they were revealing themselves. And so I stand now with clarity. Power is not noise, but stillness. Respect is not fear, but dignity. Strength is not in domination, but in restraint. And the greatest revenge is not in striking back, but in living so fully, so strongly, that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. The journey that began in silence ends here, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in triumph. I look back on the years when I sat at family dinners, shrinking beneath the weight of their laughter, and I hardly recognize that version of myself. That person carried humiliation like a chain, wore judgment like a second skin, and endured ridicule as if it were an unchangeable law of life. But that person no longer exists. He was transformed, reshaped, reborn through the fire of mockery and the patience of silence. What I am now is not the product of their approval, nor the reflection of their comparisons. What I am now is the architect of my own destiny. I am proof that no insult can define a man forever, no label can contain him, and no cruelty can cage him if he refuses to surrender his truth. The boy they called lazy was never weak. The man they dismissed as jobless was never powerless. I was building all along, brick by brick, in silence so deep that they mistook it for nothingness. Yet in that silence, a new self was born. Rebirth is not loud. It does not arrive with trumpets or applause. It comes quietly, like dawn after the darkest night. It comes when you realize that the voices that once haunted you have lost their power. Their scorn used to echo in my mind, shaping my every thought. Now those echoes are nothing more than distant whispers, fading into irrelevance. Their judgment no longer holds me, because I have learned the greatest truth of all. The only voice that defines me is my own. This is the closure I sought, not their apologies, not their remorse, not even their respect. I did not fight for their recognition. I fought to reclaim myself, and I won. The irony is almost poetic. They spent years trying to break me, yet in the end, their cruelty became the very force that made me unbreakable. They mocked me into resilience, humiliated me into patience, and ridiculed me into power. Without realizing it, they forged the strength that now stands before them. I see them now, my brother, my sister, my parents, my cousins. Their faces have changed. Where once there was smugness, now there is unease. Where once there was arrogance, now there is silence. They look at me not as the failure they imagined, but as the truth they cannot deny. And in that reversal lies my victory. It is not in their shame that I find satisfaction, but in my liberation. They no longer have chains to bind me, no words to wound me, no comparisons to diminish me. I am free. Yet freedom is not the only gift I carry. I carry wisdom, too, the wisdom that comes from suffering endured and lessons earned. I know now that true power does not shout. It whispers. True strength does not need recognition. It exists quietly, unshakably, even when unseen. And true respect cannot be demanded through fear or forced through revelation. It must flow naturally from character. That is why I no longer chase their respect, because what they offer now is hollow. I have built my own dignity, and that is enough. This journey was never about revenge, though it may have looked like it. Revenge burns quickly. It flares and dies. What I sought was something lasting, something eternal. What I sought was justice, not justice from them, but justice for myself. I needed to prove, not to them, but to me, that I was never the failure they believed. And now I know, with clarity unshakable, that I never was. The transformation is complete. Where once I lived in shadows, I now walk in light. Where once I endured their laughter, I now speak with authority. Where once I doubted my worth, I now stand unshaken in it. The man they mocked is gone. In his place stands someone stronger, wiser, untouchable. And so, as this story reaches its end, I deliver not anger, but truth. The final truth that will echo louder than any insult they ever cast my way. They thought their mockery defined me. In reality, it revealed them. They thought their laughter was power. In truth, it was weakness. They thought I was beneath them, when in fact, I was always above them, watching, waiting, building. Closure, for me, is not found in punishing them, It is found in living beyond them. It is found in walking into tomorrow without their voices dictating who I am. It is found in claiming my life as mine alone, untouched by their judgments, unshaken by their cruelty, unbound by their comparisons. And yet, I leave them with one line. A line they will never forget, because it will follow them in every paycheck, in every memory, in every reminder of the truth they once denied. It is the mic drop of my story, the strike that will outlive their arrogance and their shame. They thought I was nothing without a job, yet all along I was the one signing their paychecks. That is not just a closing line. That is my legacy. That is the truth that will stand long after their laughter has faded, long after their arrogance has crumbled, long after their comparisons have turned to dust. I walk away now, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I walk away, not with vengeance, but with victory. I walk away knowing that I am no longer defined by their scorn, but by my choices, my endurance, my truth. The rebirth is complete. The story is finished, and the final strike has been delivered.